Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I am your host, Chris Angle. I am the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is The Nature of Aesthetics. With me is my discussant and regular panelist, Rick Samuelson. Rick graduated from Yale, has an MBA from Wharton, an MA from Tufts. He's retired from the investment banking industry, and he's now a venture capitalist. Good to see you, Rick.
Thank you.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the concepts and the nature of concepts being used in current media, and compare the essence of the concept with its usage and circumstances. This week, we're going to discuss the news in which there's been a great deal of protest about the surveillance, domestic surveillance that has come from the Terrorism Act and is all over the news presently. So let's make an outline of what's happened and see where it goes from there. Of course, it all started with 9/11. And at that time, we developed an anti-terrorist policy, and from it, the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was then for international surveillance, trying to find out origins of terror relevant to the United States. But most recently, and the furor that has come onto the media recently, is Mr. Snowden's revelation that the amount of data being searched by the NSA has gone into everything domestic. So everything that everybody uses in their email, in their phone calls, everything wireless, is now being recorded and can be used in the future, and it's stored for permanently. So from this domestic surveillance, we get a warrantless surveillance. In other words, normally, in order for surveillance to happen, police need a warrant signed by a judge. But that no longer is necessary. Now, from the FISA Act, a judge can do a blanket warrant, and you get warranted surveillance of international and domestic information. Blanket. So there's no probable cause. Well, the Obama administration reaction to this is that it's necessary to fight terrorism. And it's a point. It's a valid point, and one that needs to be considered here as we weigh the amount of surveillance being brought to this society. In 2005, Congress established that reasonable grounds for surveillance on international terrorism is needed for the judge to sign the blanket warrants. So it's gone from a search warrant, which requires probable cause, to reasonable grounds that will allow us to make surveillance on international terrorism. In other words, the strictness has been lessened. So it's no longer a probable cause, it's now downgraded to reasonable grounds. Well, since we've known about this since 2006, you kind of can say, well, what's the big deal? It's been in the news quite some time. And under the Bush and Obama administration, they're both reactions that it's necessary to fight terrorism. A valid point. So let's discuss this a little bit further. We have the surveillance of the foreign intelligence, and then we've added the domestic intelligence, and probably making it, because it's a warrant, a blanket warrant, probably it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. We'll see. For your reference, the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be infringed upon unless for probable cause. Well, Obama has said that foreign and domestic intel upon the population of all those within the United States is okay, because government is us. He stated a couple months ago. And that is, we, the elected officials, are officers elected by the people. Well, the problem with this type of reasoning is that history shows that this can be abused and has been abused by officials elected by the people in other countries. Germany was a free democratic country, but it morphed into a totalitarian society. Russia. Well, you're probably thinking, where in Russia did that happen? Well, actually, after the original revolution in 1914, Russia did, for a small period of time, under Alexander Kernevsky, if I got that pronunciation correctly, created a democratic parliament, and it got up and running. One day, Lenin and his henchmen came in with arms, shut it down. Everybody got out of the parliament, and that was that. Russia became the Soviet Union. Italy, Spain, also democratic nations that had morphed into totalitarianism. So, but you say, can't happen here, as the old Frank Zappa song asks? Well, it just did. Examples are the IRS. The government turns the IRS against its own people with political views that aren't presently of the administration. The government turns on its own people. Government turned on the AP reporters and the Fox News reporter. Well, probably you still say it can't happen here, but it has in a small sense. Well, back to the Fourth Amendment. So the big question here, oh, by the way, the Fourth Amendment was created as a reaction to the writ of assistance back during British colonial times, which is a general search warrant. The British troops could search any house at any time, could even quarter their troops in anybody's house. And the founders of the Constitution, of course, were against this. So you have to ask, do we need the Fourth Amendment? If we lessen its importance, shall we do that to fight terror? And the result will be a lessening of the importance of the Fourth Amendment. We do that because of terror. And all terror that we're talking about here, and I can only think of just maybe a minor, just a just a couple of instances where there might be exceptions, but pretty much all the terror that's being generated pretty much throughout the globe is Islam related. So, why is that? Well, as it says in the Quran, fighting is prescribed for you. So we need an anti-Islamic policy, or we choose the Fourth Amendment. There's really no other choice here as I see it, and we'll ask Rick about this in a second. As I see it, we have that choice, and a possible anti-Islamic policy, limited immigration, a vow to make Muslims who do come here to shun the Islamic terror policy, such as those described in the Quran, where it says fighting is prescribed for you. But unfortunately, I don't think that's possible, because they won't do it. And I'll get to that in a second. There are many portions of the Quran that will now allow a Muslim to make a vow of no violence against the U.S. or the West, because Islam considers us unbelievers. Other possibility are some sort of oil penalties, because money is what allows terror to exist. Without money behind it, terror would have a hard time developing. We've already started a couple of establishment of foreign bases in the Middle East. I don't think we should abandon them. If we establish some forward bases, that'll make the concentration of the attention of the Islamic societies here instead of on us in the West. Well, that's enough for me in speaking for a bit here. Let's get some interaction with Rick and see what he has to say. Rick, any reaction to this Snowden surveillance news that's all over the place right now?
Well, I guess the question that arises in my mind, and I don't think we're ready to answer it yet, but it just seems to me that the blanket nature of this surveillance suggests that it is an approach to avoid being accused of profiling, which liberal governments tend to be very nervous about. The other thing is, because of the classified nature of the schemes and terror attacks or attempted terror attacks or terror plans or whatever that this approach has been able to prevent, or at least been able to track, it's hard for us to get a complete picture of how successful the surveillance techniques have been in keeping the country safe. So we're only getting kind of part of the story as far as I can see. I mean, the facts are clear. Snowden signed a contract not to release this sort of information. He will be prosecuted. The fact that he's fled to a foreign country probably will not prevent his extradition. So this is going to play out most likely, or the events surrounding him particularly will play out over a number of months as the extradition process proceeds. It's obviously unnerving that, in theory, the government is in a position to, quote unquote, listen in on anything you're saying or sending or receiving. But in practice, how much of it they actually look at or interpret is another issue. Obviously, one doesn't want to throw the entire Fourth Amendment under the bus. And for my part, I would be much more comfortable, since we're going to be doing a certain amount of surveillance anyway to prevent terrorism under the Patriot Act, I'd be much more comfortable with aggressive profiling if it avoids this broader and intrusive, frankly, surveillance approach across the entire population.
Well, I think that's a great start. We should probably include it here in the possible anti-Islamic policies would be to add profiling, and I think the basis of it is already available in policy throughout the nation. For example, universities use it in admitting certain races and giving racial preferences of one over another. And that's a kind of profiling. So I don't think it's far-fetched, and I think it's an available policy tool for any administration to be able to employ in an anti-terror situation, which we have now. I believe Israel, of course, uses it extensively, and they've been quite successful. Do you think Snowden, Rick, did the right thing, perhaps as a conscientious objector to what he saw? Did he bring a good argument to the forefront? One that will certainly eventually have to be discussed in the media?
Well, it's an issue that deserves to be discussed to the extent that certainly the public weren't aware of the breadth of the surveillance going on, that he could have used other channels is, I think, a very important issue. He could have brought it before Congress. He could have followed a number of other channels to make the issue known without potentially compromising classified information.
But didn't Congress already know about this since really since 2006? Didn't and it's been expanded since then internationally. So don't they have congressional oversights that's already know about this information or about this policy?
Well, my understanding is that even if it was communicated amongst some members of Congress, the significance of this wasn't underscored in the volumes of data and information that Congress reviews. And so the average congressman wasn't aware of this. That's my understanding.
Well, if you were Snowden and sitting there, do you think he'd think that he'd run up against a brick wall if the average congressman doesn't know about it and only those of the that have oversight responsibilities know about it? Perhaps he just thought he'd run up against a brick wall. It's a reasonable thought. It would go. I would certainly think about that. He certainly created a furor by doing what he has, and thereby getting what he feels is an important issue, and obviously many Americans now, and I do as well, being a hugely important issue before the limelight. So perhaps he made the right choice. If he took it before Congress, wouldn't that take him years to do, and he'd probably lose his employment, and His bosses would probably try to negate any of his positive interactions with Congress. What do you think?
Well, I can applaud him in the narrow sense that he came out publicly and identified himself, and he will have to live with the consequences of this, and they will likely be severe. But I'm not sure I'm convinced that he pursued every possible venue short of, making a public statement from a location in Hong Kong somewhere. I think and I don't know the details of all the venues he did pursue, admittedly, but from what I understand, he kind of dismissed those opportunities and chose the approach he did. And I'm not sure that that's always the wisest thing to do when it involves national security, frankly.
When it involves national security, but is this really an issue of national security? It really is an issue of policy of what do we choose, because he's not stopping the act of surveillance or let anything out that hasn't been really known before, but he's brought it to the limelight, and now we have to decide whether this policy of anti-terrorism that we have is really not the right one, and to possibly use other methods, as you have suggested here, of bringing profiling to the forefront as a mechanism to help with anti-terrorist policies.
Well, look, national security embraces, not simply the policies outright, but the whole network of individuals and contractual obligations and consultants and so on and so forth that are required to maintain the machinery of national security. And he's a cog in that wheel, and simply a cog. But in order to maintain the national security mechanism, the cogs kind of have to work together and fulfill their contractual obligations. Otherwise, potentially have chaos. So, look, it's not as if he was revealing the identity of, spies in secret locations who are hence, rapidly going to be brought to trial or secretly killed by foreign governments. No, it's not that egregious. But I think wherever you've got as complicated a mechanism as our national security entity writ large, that requires that many individuals and agencies work in a harmonious fashion in order to make the thing function, he will have to face the consequences of having broken his contract. And the issue needed to be aired for sure. I'm not sure it needed to be aired in the fashion it has been. I think he could have brought. Again, I don't know all of the venues that are possible for him, either through Congress or elsewhere, for bringing this issue to light. But it just seems to me that he didn't exhaust them.
Okay, certainly that's I can agree with that. But let's get back to a more important question here. Let's go back to what we discussed a little bit before about the problems of the Fourth Amendment and an anti-Islamic, anti-terror policy. And I'm equating them both because I don't know if almost the entire globe is riddled with terrorism, or wherever terrorism is found throughout the entire globe, it's pretty much an Islamic origin. Here in the United States, we've got a couple of isolated places where an individual goes out all by himself and does an act of individual terror. But as for a series of terror, when it comes from multiple choices, multiple incidents, it's Islamic driven. So I'm equating terror with Islamic society. So now we have to decide, do we compromise the Fourth Amendment in any way and add on other policies such as RIC profiling, or making those who come here from an Islamic society take a vow, or do we set up foreign bases, or shall we do some sort of penalties to the oil production, because money really is what allows terrorism to happen in the first place. So should we compromise the Fourth Amendment at all, Rick, or should we establish other new policies? What do you think?
Well, my view is clear on that. You don't compromise the Fourth Amendment at all, and you do everything you can to uphold that, but still protect the existing citizenry. So, you profile aggressively. You cut Islamic immigration to zero until this situation becomes manageable. And maybe it never will. And then maybe we'll have no Islamic immigration for years and years and years to come. If that protects the existing citizenry better, fine. I'm very happy with that.
Okay, I agree. That's a great policy. I also think that there are some others that we can do. For example, what do you think about establishing or continuing a presence in the Middle East, establishing a forward military bases, which would center their concentration there, not here? What do you think?
Well, I think we are bound to do that. I mean, that's been the pattern with the use of U.S. power in many spheres, be it Asia or Europe or elsewhere, over a long period of time. And even if we are in a downsizing period at the moment, born of our own financial folly, over time, assuming the United States can get its finances under control, there seems to be little choice but to maintain some sort of forward operational capability in the Middle East. Even if it takes a combination of seagoing power by way of aircraft carriers and so forth, and land facilities.
Okay, great. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank the audience for viewing. This is the conclusion of the Philosophical Angle, and we'll see you next week. Thanks very much.